Okay, so after close observation of and studying of the construction of this IF coil assembly, I've come to the conclusion that it's built like this. These two stands you see here, these two side stands, so this one and this one, hold or clamp together the ferrite cores you see here, those two cores. Now the clamping together is done by this little metal bracket you see here in the middle. Now this metal bracket is like, you could say, a kind of spring. Yeah, it clamps on either side of these plastic holders here, and it's really very tight. Yeah, it clamps these ferrite coils quite tightly, which is necessary actually, because there is quite a bit of force on these. Now these plastic stands themselves are clamped into the base of the IF coil, and I don't know if I could okay, so as you can see, these stands, these vertical pieces you see here, are clamped with a sort of a clamp into the base of the IF coil assembly. Now what I need to do is this. I don't necessarily need to take apart completely the IF coil assembly. What I need to do is to unsolder one side of it. So in this case I can't cut the wires, the metal contacts. I really need to unsolder them. So unlike the IF coils in a Motorola, this time I really need to unsolder. But I'm going to unsolder only one side, either this side or the other, it doesn't matter. And then I'll pinch together these clamps here and lift or skew this assembly down. Yeah, so in effect it will rotate away from the base of the IF coil. At least that's the theory. So give me a moment. Okay, I had to resort to actually cutting these tiny little wires. I don't know if the camera is strong enough to show you, but I mean, these are the wires that I cut, and I cut these wires as close as I could to the base where they were soldered, so somewhere around here. Yeah, so I cut the wires on one side, and as I said I would, I lifted these clamps you see here, these two clamps, I lifted out of the base here, and then I swiveled the whole upper structure of the IF coil to the side. And I don't know if you can see it, but the wires on the other side, and this is one of them, are still connected. So this is very fiddly work, so I'm going to have to work really carefully not to break these wires. I also colored these wires, which I cut loose, blue on the upper side, just to make sure that I will connect them to the blue marked side of the foot of the IF coil. Okay, so now we can look inside, as it were, of the IF coil assembly, and as you can see on top there is a small brass clamp, this one, which is clamping down on the top plate of the base. And if you look carefully, you can see right here, you can see a metal contact here, and you can see a metal contact here. So these contacts, in fact, are the upper contacts of the capacitors, the mica capacitors. The other contacts which you can't see, or only part of it, form the underside of the capacitors, and they are obviously on the opposite pins. So what I need to do now is to undo this brass clamp so that I can lift up the base plate and take out those defective capacitors. Now, unfortunately, and that was the case in the Motorola IF coils, this metal clamp, this brass clamp, is held on with a rivet, and you can see the upper rim of the rivet here. So this is a rivet. If I carefully tip it over, you can see at the bottom of the base, you can see here the other end of the rivet. So what I'll need to do is to somehow undo that rivet so that I can unmount the base plate. And in contrary to what I did with the Motorola IF coils, what I'm going to do with the Westinghouse coils is probably do the reverse and grind the top of the rivet instead of the bottom. And that way I hope to release the rivet from the brass clamp you see there. So that's the plan. So I'm going to take out my mini drill tool, and I'm going to fit a ball grinder to its tip and start grinding. Success! I managed to grind the top of the rivet away with this ball grinder you see here. So although I have to admit that it was reasonably painful to do so, because vibration which it subjects the whole construction to is really intense. So to keep a very tight grip on the foot with all those vibrations is really painful and hard to do. And in the end, I had to resort to cutting off completely the the top of the IF construction, because the vibrations were simply way too much for it, and I was afraid that it would crack or break entirely because of the vibrations. So I ended up by cutting the other two wires too and taking off this part. So that's one thing I did. So as you can see here, this little ring you see here is in fact the upper rim of the rivet, which was keeping this clamp down onto the top of the base, so on the base plate in fact here. So what I'm going to do now is remove the base plate, and hopefully I'll be able to reveal to you the capacitors underneath. So one moment, I'm going to put the camera in a good angle. So I can't make this a very long shot because the battery is almost finished, but if you take it like this. Well, as you can see, if I slide a little screwdriver underneath, I can lift the top plate. There you go. So the top plate is off, and underneath these small contacts you see here are the capacitors. So if I move these contacts up a bit like this, in fact, okay, they are a bit stiff, but it ends up well. So, and I lift this contact up. Whoop. Yeah. Okay, so I lifted the contact up. I'm doing the same thing on this side. There you go. So, excuse me. You see here a small mica plate which I can now lift up. There you go. I just popped it off. So let me take the tweezers. So this little plate, as you can see, has two capacitors in the form of a strip printed on a mica plate, a transparent mica plate. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it's two mica plates and some silver coated metal strips in between. Now you can see their edges are black, really black. So this is indicative for the fact that the silver has probably corroded or oxidized through and through, and therefore has the capacitance has completely changed of these capacitors, and probably for at least for AC voltage, for high frequency voltage, they have formed either a total barrier or they have formed a sort of a short circuit. I don't know which, but in essence, these capacitors have become completely ineffective. So I removed them, as you can see. Now, the next step to take is, as you see here, there are 4 contacts. There are these two, which I bent upwards. So there are these two here, one here, one here. And then there are 2 others which are still flat, one here and one here. And what I'll need to do now is to somehow mount on these contacts, on these 4 contacts, I should say. I should mount modern, new mica capacitors of around about 100 picofarads, and in such a way that they won't hamper putting back this IF construction onto the base. So that's going to be a little bit fiddly, but I shouldn't have too much trouble doing it. And in fact, unmounting the top plate from this base has been much smoother and much less painful in a sense than unmounting or disassembling the IF coils of the Motorola. Certainly with a lot less damage to the base of the IF coil. So that's where I stand. I'm going to stop now for tonight because it's almost bedtime for me. But I'll be back soon with another update. So I would ask you to stay tuned, and hopefully I'll be back soon with another update.